Spelling Modules is a foundational resource that we wrote to support kids with spelling patterns that they've already learned how to read. So the idea here is that in K2, they've already learned these phonics patterns. They've already learned how to read these. They likely have learned how to spell these, but for some reason, it's not sticking. So it is foundational. It includes over 100 micro lessons that are designed to give kids the explicit, repeated practice that they need to master those common spelling patterns. Again, some people think that the English language is so tricky and that's why spelling is challenging, but I just told you that over 90% of words have a predictable spelling. So these are the spelling patterns that we included in this resource. One of the great things that teachers are super happy about with this resource is that it doesn't take up a ton of time. Each of these micro lessons really are about 7 to 10 minutes per session, and they require, quite literally, almost nothing. Minimal resources, mostly just a notebook and a pencil. There's not a lot of like teacher prep for you. Oftentimes you can just open it and you can teach it right from there if you have a marker and a whiteboard and kids have something to write with. Also included in this resource is an assessment, which can help you make instructional decisions on where to begin your teaching and whether you're going to teach whole class or small group. So there is a ton of flexibility built in with this resource. So these are the modules or the sequence that this book goes through. So it follows a phonics scope and sequence, but because it's intended for upper grade students, it was written to span grades 3 through 5. So all third grade teachers, fourth grade teachers, fifth grade teachers have the exact same book. We wanted to make sure that we're giving kids early opportunities to spell longer, more complex words. So module 1 is called Building Words with Small Parts. This is where you're introducing your early phonics principles, your short vowel spellings, your blends, your digraphs, your word families. But again, when we were writing, we really wanted to think like, how can we make this feel big kid friendly? One of the ways that we did this early on was to not only include your typical spellings of short vowel sounds like I for I, but we also included things like Y in gym and I consonant E like in give, right? So it's not just like your typical K2 phonics. We tried to upper gradify it. And you'll also see that we move into longer words, multisyllabic words, very quickly. Module 2 is long vowel sounds and spellings. Again, because we're considering this a foundational resource, we didn't want to overwhelm kids with all of the spellings of long vowels. So to help us make decisions about which to include, we leaned into Hannah and Fry's catalog of spellings to help us choose the most frequent spellings. So I think like long A might have 8 different spellings that kids can encounter, but we thought like, what are the most frequent ones that kids will see and that kids will use? And that's where we chose the ones that we were going to include. Module 3 is word endings. And this module was included early in the sequence. It's probably one of my favorite modules, but it's early in the sequence because we wanted to quickly give kids an opportunity to correctly spell words with inflectional endings, right? So in this module, you'll teach kids not only the inflectional endings like S and ES, ING, ED, so on and so forth, but you'll teach them the spelling generalizations that are associated with common word endings. Like, when do I choose S or ES when making a word plural? When do I drop the final E before adding a suffix? When do I change Y to I? When do I double the final consonant before adding a suffix? Those are the patterns that are taught in word endings. And I think it's one of my favorites because it's one of those that when we're looking at kids writing, this tends to be where many third, fourth, and fifth graders have some difficulty. Module 4 is titled Complex Consonants, and this module includes things like the different spellings of the sound, so like F, FF, PH, and when you might use each of those, the different spellings of the sound, so S, double S, C, CE, the J sound, so J, G, GE, DGE, and the ch sound, when do I use CH versus when do I use TCH. Module 5 is R-controlled vowels. We only included the most common ones here, so like R, so on and so forth. Module 6, we titled Other Ways Vowels Work. Think about like your diphthongs here. So the oi, oi, and oy, and when to use which of those. The ow sound, ou and ow, aw, au, aw, like in book, and oo, like in moon, and also the dreaded schwa also comes in module 6. I think I lost sleep over schwa. Module 7 is the final module of the book, and this wraps up by explicitly teaching the 6-syllable types. I want you to know, though, that this is not the first time that kids are getting practice spelling multisyllabic words, and it's also not the first time that they're hearing each of these syllable types. So, for example, in Module 2, when you're introducing long vowel sounds and spellings, you're also introducing vowel consonant E as a syllable type and vowel teams as a syllable type. Module 7 just wraps it all together, reviewing the syllable types. So those are your modules. Then each module is broken down into blocks, or the blocks you can think of as like the parts of the module. If you're familiar with our units of study, you can almost think about them ish like bends. This is an example of the 6 blocks that are included in Module 2, long vowel spellings. So you have block 1, which introduces vowel consonant E, block 2, long A, then long E, so on and so forth. Then within each block, there's a series of usually 3, sometimes 4 sessions that follow a fairly mostly predictable sequence. And in there's a variety of different methods, which I'll go through more in depth. But for example, in block 1, session 1, you'll introduce silent E with building words. On the next day, session 2, kids have practiced spelling words with silent E in isolation, and then they'll put the learning to practice by editing a piece with a focus on silent E. In block 2, session 1, you'll review a consonant, vowel consonant E spelling or a consonant E spelling because you're in long A, and then you'll introduce kids to the most common way to spell the long A sound, which is A, like in an open syllable, like in baby. You'll again do this through some word building. In session 2, you'll introduce kids to the next most common spellings, AI and AY, inviting them to do a word sort, studying the patterns, and then you'll introduce kids to the generalizations surrounding the spelling. So with the word sorts, we're not just saying like sort them by visual because that's what they're going to do anyways, but we really want to get them to think like, when do you use AI? When do you use AY? And we've realized that big kids want to know the why, right? They want to know why and they want to know when do I use AI and AY. So that's the goal of the sort here. But you'll see this explicit teaching around the why introduced in every single module. So if you yourself are like, I don't know why to use AI versus AY, you'll learn alongside the kids too. And it is written in a way that like a lot of the teachers that have picked this up, they're like, oh, I've learned a lot about spelling and why you use certain patterns over other ones. So to wrap up that block, you'll challenge kids to apply what they've learned by about all the long A spellings through some sentence dictation. Think old school sentence dictation. Why? Because it gives kids the opportunity to apply their learned spelling patterns in context, orchestrating not only what they learned about that current spelling pattern, but about others that they've learned too, as well as sentence structure and construction. So again, it's not just can I spell those words on like a spelling test on a list, but am I applying them in sentence writing? At the end of each module, so after you've taught all the blocks, at the end of each module, you'll find a review session where everything is wrapped up and it comes together. So the methods, like I said, they're predictable, they're recycled throughout the resource. One of the things that you'll often do is you'll often warm up with a phonological awareness activity. To be proficient spellers, we need to be phonologically aware, right? So we actually don't just need to be phonologically aware, we need to be phonologically proficient. And we especially need to be phonemically proficient. And that means that we're able to hear the individual sounds and words, and we're able to do things with those sounds. We can isolate them, we can manipulate them, we can blend them, we can segment them. So as a phonological awareness warm-up, I might do something like this. And by the way, I have 3 samples on here. You're not doing every single one of them in a day. These are just examples that you might see. I might say, I'm going to say some words. What sound is the same in each word? Ready? Cake, brain, baby, stay, great, ate. And hopefully the kids are like, A. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. In each of these words, you hear the A sound. But did you know that the A sound is spelled differently in each of these words? Today, you're going to learn the most common way to spell the A sound. And then I might go into some explicit teaching about that. You might do some rhyming work where you say a word and have kids come up with more words that rhyme with that word, or have them decide whether or not 2 words rhyme. Why? Because rhyming supports spelling. Because oftentimes, if you can think of a word that rhymes with the word that you're trying to spell, it'll help you spell that new word, right? How many words can you come up with that rhyme with cash or that rhyme with train, right? It doesn't always work. So, for example, like stain and lane, they both rhyme with each other, but the rhyme part is spelled differently. So these strategies and methods aren't necessarily foolproof, but we're giving kids some strategies that they can have in their own back pockets. One of the things that I have found most difficult working with older students who are working to become more proficient spellers is, of course, with multisyllabic words. Do they even know how many syllables there are in words? So sometimes you'll warm up by saying, oops, sorry, I'm going to say some words and then have kids figure out how many syllables there actually are. So, like chopstick, compensate, fragrant. And again, we're doing that because oftentimes the spelling patterns that they're learning depends on where they are in the syllable. And then, of course, there's the idea of actually isolating where in the syllable you're hearing a particular sound. So I'm going to say some words just so you can think about how this goes that all have the oi sound. And I want you to think where in the syllable you hear it. Is it in the beginning, the middle, or the end? And in this book, we call it playing the game of BME, beginning, middle, and end. And kids literally just, it's a thumbs up if it's in the beginning, thumbs to the side if it's in the middle, thumb down if it's at the end. So we're listening for the oi sound. So annoy. Right, it's at the end. It's actually in the beginning too, because it's at the end of it's one syllable. Avoid, the oi sound is in the middle. Turmoil, middle. Foyer, foyer is actually, the oi sound is at the end because again, we're getting kids to think that where in the syllable is that sound. Same thing with oyster. So being able to figure out where in the syllable you hear certain sounds can actually help you choose the right spelling. OI and OY both spell the oi sound. OI often used in the beginning or middle of a syllable, OY at the end of a syllable. So these are just ways that the lessons do tend to start before you go into that explicit teaching, getting kids to hear the sounds and play with the sounds first. I talked a little bit about sorts. This is an example that's in spelling modules. So when there's multiple ways to spell a sound, you might encourage kids to sort some words, looking for the pattern. Again, not just sorting based on what they see, but getting them to think like, okay, now you've sorted them into A and AY. What do you notice? Where do you notice AI shows up in words? Where do you notice AY shows up in words? Interactive writing is another method that you'll see woven throughout. Once kids know the generalizations, you might see some interactive writing. So with interactive writing, you are controlling the piece. You're essentially co-writing a piece together that's full of lots of words with the target spelling patterns. In this example, it's multisyllabic words. This is at the end in module 7 with the syllable types. As the teacher, you end up writing the bulk of the words, but I'm going to pass the pen when you get to words with that target spelling pattern. So this is an example of the finished product. You're writing all the words that are unbolded, and then you're like, we'd like to explain. Who thinks they can come up and write the word explain, right? And they take your pen and they're writing the word explain. So they're getting more practice spelling words with those patterns. A fan favorite, especially with older kids, is interactive editing. So when you're making a piece for interactive editing, you want to make sure that there's a handful of words with that target spelling pattern. So you'll see this one, for example, this is brave, and you'll see several errors with the silent E pattern because this comes after you've taught vowel, consonant, E. So I'm going to encourage kids to edit the piece and then go back to their own writing and edit theirs. If they can edit somebody else's writing, they should be able to do the same with their own. Interactive editing is typically like a day three, a session three um, thing because it typically doesn't take place until the patterns have been taught. We're thinking about transfer here. I talked about the reading, writing reciprocity. So once kids have learned a target spelling pattern, you'll see some opportunities where you're handing them a text like a decodable featuring words with that target spelling pattern. It's going to help kids see the relationship between the words, the meaning of the words, and their spelling, as well as transfer their learning to reading. You'll see time and time again that the links in all of these sessions are like, as you go off to read today, be on the lookout for words with whatever pattern. Or as you go off to write today, you might take a minute and you might edit your writing through the lens of whatever you taught. So the goal really is transfer, that we're not just teaching this in isolation, but that kids are actually transferring into their writing pieces. So building words is another method that you'll see. Building words can be done with magnetic tiles or letter cards or index cards. It can be done with a marker. It doesn't have to be like this like super manipulative thing. It is great if it's manipulative, but it's a hands-on way to get kids to manipulate letters to spell words. And then, like I said, there's your classic dictation. So when you're asking kids to spell words in isolation, you'll see that we've always given a word with a sentence using the word in context. So I remember like when I was teaching and I was doing the dreaded spelling test, I would just have a list of words and I would have to come up with a sentence on the spot, which always took me forever and a day and shouldn't have. So I kept that in mind when we were writing and gave you the sentences. So it might be like flush, be sure to flush the toilet, flush. This way, they're able to connect the meaning to the spelling, and you don't have to think about coming up with the sentence. I said there's also sentence dictation. So you're giving a sentence full of a few words featuring the spelling pattern that you're working with. It gives you an eye into how kids are applying spelling generalizations while also thinking about sentence writing, making sure that they have proper capitalization and proper punctuation. Just a little bit more research to think about what we included. Wiley Blevins did a study that showed that kids who received explicit phonics instruction, followed by reading of a decodable text with opportunities to spell words during dictation, outperformed those kids in decoding and spelling who didn't receive this kind of instruction. So that's why all these methods are kind of woven in together. So if you're taking some of this and you're going to create some of your own spelling, just don't think like, oh, I love the idea of sorts and only do sorts. You want to think about the three big components. We've also included an assessment. So there's an assessment to help you determine where to start. Each module has an assessment, and it looks like this one on the left here, which has 6 foundational words, 6 more complex words, and 2 sentences, which include multiple words with that target spelling pattern. There's a scoring sheet here to help you determine where individual students might need more support, as well as a class data tracker that can help you see patterns and help you figure out where you might start. The beauty of this resource is that it's super flexible. It could be used whole class, it could be used small group, it could be used in a one-on-one setting. What we didn't say is if kids score 6 out of 10, start here, or if kids score 7 out of 12, move on. And I know I just said 2 very different numbers. That was intentional. So part of the reason is because you can make the decision yourself, thinking about know your players. I always say that, know your players. Do you want to give all 12 words in isolation? Do you just want to focus on the multisyllabic words because you're like, that's actually where it breaks down. It's not in the single syllable words. So you can make the decision and then you want to just look at your data and think about what you know about your kids. This is just going to help you figure out where a starting point might be. So again, it could be used whole class, it could be used small group, it could be used in a one-on-one setting. So I hope this introduction to spelling modules has been helpful. They're short, targeted lessons that give a clear, structured way to help kids support their spelling development. It makes the lessons make it easy to differentiate and meet kids where they are. Hopefully, you're thinking about that assessment and how assessment-driven instruction can help you focus on the skills that kids really need. It really is a great resource to have at your fingertips, one that's going to build stronger, more confident writers. I know that a lot of teachers have just used this to say, like, oh boy, I'm looking at this kid's writing and they continue to spell whatever pattern wrong. Let me do a little teaching of myself, and then it'll help you confer with writers in stronger ways too.